audio.
It could be so easy to just believe that this mythical grade or thing that you've had for so long is just impossible. And then you realize it's not. It's very attainable. It's right there. And the biggest barrier is just believing that you can do it.
Hey y'all, I'm Ryan Devlin, and welcome back to The Struggle. I'm so happy you're here. I'm so psyched that you are here. I'm like out of my mind right now. This Kai Lightner interview, today's guest is Kai Lightner, by the way. You knew that. You clicked on the thing. This interview just hits on every freaking level. I've been wanting Kai on the show since I started this thing. It finally worked out, and I'm so glad that it took a while to work out, actually, because he just came off of one of the most impressive years of climbing accomplishment that's ever happened. I mean, you guys already know this, but he climbed Life of Villains, which is like this killer 9A out in the Hurricane, and then he followed that up with the first ascent of Death of Villains 9A Plus or 515A, the first black person to climb that grade. He didn't stop there. He just kept charging. He had a week where he climbed 3 9As. This guy is just getting warmed up. None of those projects are anywhere near his limit if you just base it on how much time it took or how much effort he put in there. I feel like Kai is really just getting started on how he's going to be pushing the limits in this sport that he has been dominating since he was a kid. I mean, as a comp crusher, he basically won everything you could possibly win for a decade when he was younger, and then took some time off, went to college, started this incredible charity organization called Climbing for Change that we talk a lot about later on in this interview. And then when he came back, this is where I think the real substance of the interview is his body was totally different. He went from being a boy to becoming a man. He gained 60 pounds. He put inches on his height, a ton of muscle. And as he put it, it was like a whole new car. He had to learn how to drive a whole new car. And the struggles that went along with that, but also the learnings, the mental fortitude, and the techniques and the tactics that he took away from working with this new body, I think are applicable to all of us as we're all struggling in our own ways to use the bodies that we have in the best way that we can, regardless of the grade that we climb. And so I just found all of this to be incredibly relatable, even though Kai is on a totally different stratosphere as me and pretty much everybody who's listening to this right now. But that's why I started this show. The Struggle is all about connecting with the best climbers in the world and finding ways to relate to them through their struggles and our own, because we all love this sport so much. We all want to do better at it and have more fun at it. And today's conversation, I think, just does a beautiful job of weaving that path. I am so happy that you're here for this one. And before we jump in with Kai, quick little update from my training and climbing life. I did manage to get out to the Red River Gorge about a week and a half ago, got out on some real rock, which felt great. It's still quite hot here. It's the end of August as I'm recording this intro here. And, the days haven't been amazing to be out on rock, but I'm having a blast and actually put in some hard effort. I was a little bit worried about this lumbrical issue that I've had in my hand, but tried really hard on some low 12s at this great crag at the Red called Bear's Den. Highly recommend it if you haven't been climbing over there. There's some amazing routes, and it felt good to push myself. It also felt good to kind of push my fingers and kind of test that injury, so that felt great. But mostly I've been spending my time in the gym, still doing a lot of work on the tread wall like Coach Eric Hurst has asked me to do, and I'm also doing some in-person, virtual, but live coaching with Nate Drolet. Nate was on to talk about movement on a 2-part pro clinic. If you haven't heard that, it's amazing. Nate is an absolute expert when it comes to movement. And so I've actually been pulling him up on my phone. We're just doing a video conference while I'm at the gym with the moon board that I have access to here. And he's got his spray wall at his home gym, his little crab shack there that he calls it. And he's helping me work on different movement deficiencies that I've got, mistakes and bad habits that I'm making. And the progress has been crazy, y'all. I've had a couple in-person sessions with Nate just on the phone, and I'm sending projects and doing moves on the moon board that I'd never been able to, not because I'm getting stronger, but just I'm getting better with my movement. And so I'm really loving that. I've been posting about that on Instagram. You can check that out. I'll try to share more as I go. And I think that ties really well into this conversation here with Kai, who is an absolute master of movement. His technique, his drop knees, his heel hooks, the way he can contort and position his body on a wall, whether it's, a really dynamic comp climb type setup at the gym, or whether he's doing these long enduro climbs and these power endurance test pieces that he's been doing in the caves. His movement is just a work of art, and I love that. I aspire to it. I got so much out of this interview. Let's get right into it right now. I want to do a quick shout out to patrons and subscribers. Thank you all for supporting the show. There is an incredible bonus episode with Kai that you now have access to. And if you aren't a patron or subscriber, you can get access to that with a free trial. I'll tell you more about what we cover in that. He answers a ton of listener questions. It's really, really good. But first, let's chalk up with one of the most thoughtful and insightful guests that I've ever had on this show, the incredibly talented Kai Lightner. You were in Lander recently. Are you still there?
No, I wasn't in Lander. My film was just premiering in Lander.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I got you.
I was promoting it because I'm super proud of it, but I told Gas, the producer, that I was tired of traveling. So I was staying at home and I was going to let him handle it.
Is home in Colorado? Because I also saw that you were filming with Alex Puccio and the Rope people recently, I think.
Yeah. So I live in Denver and I've known Alex for a really long time, since I was a kid. When she asked, I was like, of course I'll come and hang out. And also, obviously also I look up to her.
Oh, she's amazing. It's great. I've been trying to get her on the show forever. So one of these days when she slows down, maybe when she has that kiddo and she'll have a little bit more time. I've been trying to get you on the show forever too, since, you were top of my list, season 1. And Drew Mack was one of my first guests that I had on, and he's become a friend. I'm in Kentucky here, so Drew is like Kentucky royalty, of course. And, the timing didn't work out. I think you had a lot going on at the time when I was begging him to connect me with you. And here we are. So thank you. I'm so happy that now is the time that we're connecting, because a lot has happened over the last few years since I first reached out to you. And so we have even more to talk about now.
Yeah, I know. I haven't seen Drew in forever, but he's like one of those people. I always use the phrase lighthouses because I can't remember what book I read as a kid, but like the principle that stuck out is like there's some people in your life that come into play that just completely change the trajectory of your future and like help you progress forward. I feel like Drew was definitely one of those people for me, like who helped me become more comfortable with like outdoor climbing and kind of taught me the ropes initially when I was a really little kid. And like, I don't know if I would really want to be outside if Drew hadn't been the one who brought me on initially. So yeah.
Oh, that's great.
I love Drew.
Yeah, he's just the sweetest dude. Obviously a very talented climber, but just such a wonderful heart, just such a good person to be around, and absolutely a great ambassador for climbing. And how fortuitous that he did get you psyched and comfortable and loving outdoor climbing, because this current chapter that you're in, at least, you have just been performing at the absolute highest level. Congratulations on the past year you've had. Probably the best year of outdoor climbing that maybe anyone has ever had. It's so cool and inspiring to see.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been a lot has been going on this year for sure.
Yeah, it's so cool. I'm thrilled to dive in. I kind of follow a bit of a structure on the show here. I've got some set chapters. We'll talk through training, nutrition, tactics, mental game, some things that you're doing kind of off the rock, climbing for change and this kind of thing. I've got a lot of questions that were sent in from patrons and listeners. I won't be able to get to all of them, but we'll try to tackle some of those towards the end there. So without further ado, let's just dive in. I'm curious, when I pose the question here, what comes to mind in your relationship with struggle as a climber?
I guess the first thing that comes to mind is that saying like how nothing worth achieving is going to happen without struggle involved. Like if you're not having tribulations and trials, and you're not really going to be performing at your highest and achieving your max potential. So I feel like this has been a lot of things in my life where I was pretty convinced, I guess, that it wouldn't be another step forward in some way, shape, or form, but like somehow things just worked out, and I wouldn't take any of it for granted or take it away, really. I don't have a lot of regrets in terms of how things have panned out for me. I think I would do everything the same if I could, because the place I am at now, I am just grateful at how at peace and happy I feel with my career and how things are going. So yeah, I just guess struggle is necessary, I guess.
Yeah.
is what I think.
Yeah, and from your career looking at like competing at the absolute highest level for many years and now more recently pushing yourself into new increasingly the hardest territory that you've ever climbed, recently here outdoors. There's a lot of struggle that goes into both of those. There's competitive struggle and the pressures around that. There's a lot of struggle when you're trying to punch into a new grade like you did with Death of Villains. And you seem like you've got this kind of, fighter's spirit and maybe even seek out struggle. I don't know. Like when you think about your climbing and you think about like doing the hardest things ever, what does that feel like to you?
I really do love the process and embracing the steps it takes to get to where I want to be, whether that's training, whether that's mock competitions, or I've always loved being in the gym, pushing my body and my mind to its limits and just seeing what comes of that in the end. Like, I feel like I've always just been that climber where, if I don't leave practice exhausted or if I feel like I didn't put my best foot forward, no matter what the result is, not going to feel good enough for me. And so I feel like that mindset is pretty easy to transfer from competitions and outdoor climbing because you need it for both in different ways. I think competition climbing is more so like if you don't perform in that moment, then it doesn't matter the work you put in. You have to start over and prepare for the next competition. And I feel like that situation either brings the best or worst out of you. And for me, it's always brought the best. And it's helped me with outdoor climbing too, because, you could work a climb forever, but if everything doesn't click in the right moments to send, then it's just another day in the process and the chapter never closes. And so you have to be able to commit and put yourself in that mindset to achieve whatever great thing you're trying to do. And so I feel like I don't know if I've mastered anything at 24, but I feel like I have it a bit figured out now, more than I did when I was a kid. And I'm just like loving the process now more than ever.
Well, you mentioned training there, and that's been a big part of your career and your life. You did seem to take some time when you were in college to kind of maybe step back from maybe the hardest training and climbing and projecting. But then it seems like there's a very kind of defined chapter here as you've focused on these cutting edge projects outdoors. But we can, look back before that as well as I take us into the training chapter here. And I'm curious, when you think about where you've struggled in your training, what comes to mind there?
I guess in recent times, especially before I sent Life of Villains, the struggle for me was more so my mind. It was like the comparison of who I used to be and if I could ever live up to that. And also trying to compare the feelings that I was used to expecting as a kid and trying to compare that to what I was feeling then. Because I feel like a lot of training and a lot of performing is repetition and routine. And not only is that physical, but that's physiological inside. Like, when things are clicking because feeling good starts to feel familiar. It's like, okay, I'm supposed to be feeling this at this point in my training cycle. And when I go to perform, I'm supposed to be feeling like this. But it had been such a long time since I had been in that routine and cycle that I wasn't getting the same feelings that I was used to. And it was a little bit annoying. Like, I was like, I don't know. I can't really tell where I am or if I'm ready. I kind of just have to gauge based upon how I feel when it's time to go on the project. It had been a long time since I had tried moves that hard or I put myself in that environment. And so I had to kind of regain my rhythm and figure out what is my new normal. And at first it was kind of a struggle. Yeah, like when I showed up to the project with Ben and I was moving around, like everything felt possible, but everything just felt different. Like I was putting myself in a new environment, even though technically I guess it wasn't new, it just had been a long time. But I felt like the more I got into the groove, the more I started to feel out what my new normal was and like build a routine from there. And I feel like everything has happened a lot smoother and quicker from that first step. But I really have to like thank the process and the time I had to do Life of Villains in order to help me get to the point where I am now.
Such a cool and like mature perspective, I think, on those feelings that come from pushing ourselves into totally new territory, or at least territory that we've been out of for a while. And I think for somebody like myself, that's a weekend warrior, I mean, it's still quite relatable. We obviously climb at very different levels, but I can experience that too. To have taken time off, or I'm trying a new project and it's a totally different like energy system that I'm hitting. And so I'd love to peel back on that a little bit. I've heard you in other interviews, and you write very eloquently and in quite a bit of detail on your Instagram as well about your process. And part of what I have read was that you really like to train specifically for a project, or at least when it came to Life of Villains, and I'm assuming then by extension Death of Villains, you had that project in mind. And so your training, it sounds like, took shape around that. So I am curious, when we're kind of geeking out over training for a minute here, do you have like certain base training of things that you're always trying to hit, or is it very tailored to and motivated by having a specific project in mind?
Well, I feel like being a competition climber, I was very used to training a Rolodex of skills as a base and then building on top of that. Because, I mean, when you do competitions, they could put any route, any boulder, testing any skill set at any time, and you have to be prepared in the moment. And if you're not, you're just not. And so you have to be at least average or slightly above average in almost everything. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like that is a feeling that I can never just get rid of. It's like when I feel like something's lacking in my climbing, it feels glaring, and I feel like I have to address it. And so like I have like certain base things I'm always doing. Like I'm always doing my like flexibility, mobility training. I'm always doing like core training and making sure that like my joints and shoulders and everything are stable, because I feel like when you develop like a stable foundation as an athlete, then when you start building onto that, like the specialized training never feels like too much of a burden on your body. Because it can really get to that point where when you're trying things at the extremes of your ability and you're pushing yourself to your limits, like if those tendons and those muscles and, you know, things aren't supported and balanced, like it's a lot easier to be injured. So I guess I'm not sure if I'm answering your question very well, but like, yeah, like I do have like base exercises and things that I will do that I've developed. Like, I mean, I've had the same coach since I was 6. And so like he knows me and my body and what I'm good and not good at. And I can literally send him like a video of my climbing. He can tell me parts of my training or my muscles that don't look as strong, like based upon like the fact that he's watched me my whole life. And so, yeah, like I definitely have a baseline that I look for.
From my seat here, the list of things that you're not good at is pretty damn short. Like I can't think of one, but obviously at your level and with your coach, there are areas of opportunity, if certainly not weaknesses compared to the rest of us humans. But I'm curious, from your perspective, what are your areas of opportunity that you tend to work on kind of in an ongoing situation, even when you're not focused on a specific climb?
Well, I feel like a lot of times with climbers, I mean, I guess really in any sport, sometimes your weaknesses can be a bit more tailored to just your physiology, like what you are genetically disposed to or not. And like I'm pretty heavy, I have long limbs, I'm tall. And so obviously there's going to be certain moves that like are not as comfortable for me, like, you know, grabbing really small crimps or pockets or certain things where it's like my joints and structure doesn't support that style of climbing as much as, you know, someone who's a bit smaller or has smaller hands or, you know, just a different build. And so like those are some of the things that like recently, as I've been looking to the future as like what projects I might be trying to do in the fall or something, like Shane has been putting in more like hangboarding training and, you know, more like just trying to get me uncomfortable in small boxes so that I know how to get out of them. And it's something I've always done as a climber, but when you're trying at your limit, the margin of error is a lot smaller. And so you want to be able to almost train to be stronger than the moves you're anticipating, so that if you have to adjust on the fly, it doesn't end up being catastrophic. So those are the things I think of off the top of my head.
So thoughtful. I love it. I love just training, you know, harder than the moves that you need to do. And obviously you're doing some of the hardest moves in the world. So that's some pretty hard training. I'm curious what a week looks like for you. Like right now, maybe like a base training week, like how many days on, off? Are you breaking it into energy systems? Like kind of geek out with me for a second about what a 7-day, you know, Kai Lightner week looks like.
It's so funny. I just did a video with Alex Puccio and her husband, Robin, and I took them into a day of my training.
Oh, great. Well,
And
we'll link to that because I'm sure they'll be putting it out, before this episode comes out. So I'll make sure I link to that, but let's talk through it as well a little bit.
100%. I think I broke them a little bit. I feel a little bad.
Oh, man. If you can break Alex Puccio, you're going hard, dude. Although she is pregnant.
Well, I'm about to say she is pregnant. I think a pregnant Alex Puccio like puts us a little closer
I love it.
to level.
Yeah.
But I feel like for me, a general week, I'm just trying to be well-rounded. And so I usually will balance it out based upon it depends, because if I'm just like maintaining, I will do like a 5-day training week, and it will depend on, I guess, just the balance of what I'm trying to gain. And so it's very case by case sometimes when it comes to climbers. Like some people have more like climbing lean programs. Some people have a balance of climbing and calisthenics and off the wall training. And I feel like for me, I'm more of the latter. Like I like to have a routine that's just as long off the wall as it is on the wall. And so if I will, have a workout schedule that encompasses like 6 hours in a day, like 3 of those will probably be me not even touching the wall, whether that's some cardio, some stretching, maybe some off the wall, like light weight training. I don't really do a lot of weights because I build muscle really easily, so I don't need it as much. But, things that like are keeping me balanced. And then the other 3 hours that might be on the wall, whether it's an endurance day, a power endurance day, a maintenance day. It really just depends. And I've also, as I've gotten older, become less afraid of changing that based upon how I feel. I feel like I'm very like OCD, and I can't leave the gym unless everything's done. So I'll just stay until it is, even if I'm tired. But as I've gotten older, I've learned that like sometimes it's okay to switch out a training day and do things at a little less intensity, because if your body isn't recovering or performing, then you're not getting the max potential out of a day that you could if you had just adjusted it a little bit and allowed your body to heal for a better day the next time around. And so I've had several times where I've called Shane and I'm like, Shane, I'm gonna have to switch Monday and Thursday around. I'm not feeling it. And Shane is perfectly fine. Like he's grown to trust me because he knows that like, well, first of all, there's no harder critic on my climbing or performance than me. And so my mom and Shane's jobs have always been to just manage my expectations and put me in a place to succeed and, help me calm down when I feel like I am like pushing myself a bit too far. And so Shane is like, if that's how you feel, then that's how you feel. And we'll just go with the flow.
I feel like a lot of climbers, not everyone, of course, but at least a lot of the climbers that I come into contact with are very kind of type A OCD. Like we really do love to like check off the boxes of our training to the point where, we might push ourselves to injury or exhaustion just because we hate to not do the things we want to do. So was that, that shows some maturity there. I don't know, like was that process a challenging one for you to get to where you are now? And how do you look at rest now, rest days or rest time compared to maybe what you did 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
I feel like perhaps it just took some introspection. Like when you're training day in and day out, and my first instinct is always to be just push, like push to the next day, it'll be fine. But when you start to notice a pattern of, like if you push really hard one day, then you push hard the next day, and you're not only not getting the output that you want, but you've kind of wasted a day where it could have just been a productive rest day, and the next day could have been more productive. Then I feel like you start to notice those patterns and adjust them so that you like are making the gains in a way that makes sense. Because I feel like a lot of times people will just show up because they feel like they have to, because the program tells them to, and have a completely unproductive training day and then another rest day, and you've kind of just wasted a day that could have been a lot more productive and efficient if you had just not gone to the gym, come back the next day and had a significantly better performance that actually will help you improve and move forward. So I don't know. I feel like I just took some maturity, because like taking time off and coming back and realizing like there's some things that I can do better than I could before. And there's some things that just don't work the same as when I was a younger kid. So you just got to adjust to what your body is telling you. I've always been very in tune, listening to what my body is telling me and adjusting things accordingly.
Thank you so much for that perspective, a little window inside an elite athlete's training, but also your mentality around it, your emotional state, as well as your, kind of analytical state around that.
Well, I'll say that everybody's body is different. And like some people require that level of volume to feel like they're maintaining their level of climbing. And you'll see it even at the World Cup level. Like some people will be in the gym 6-7 hours straight, training, lap training, 4x4s, and that works for them. And then there's other athletes that will show up and do an hour or two of climbing, and then that's it. And and they perform at the same level. And so it's like, it all depends on how your body like processes that load and that training, and even does recovery. It's just case by case.
This episode is brought to you at zero cost thanks to our buddies over at Rungni. You guys know this is Magnus Mitbo's company, and one of my favorite products is back in stock. I'm talking about Mag Juice. Maybe the greatest name of a liquid chalk that's out there. I don't know if they were self-aware of this when they did it, but man, they totally nailed it, and this stuff works incredibly well. Liquid chalk in general is just a great way to go to start as a base layer. I always start up with some liquid chalk, and then I'll dip into my loose chalk as I'm climbing. And that base layer of liquid chalk, whether you're in the gym or out at the crag, is going to allow you to climb longer and chalk up less, which is going to hopefully help you get up your project because you're going to be conserving a little bit of energy. I love Mag Juice. It's probably not going to stay in stock for long. You can score yourself 15% off Mag Juice, Mag Dust Chalk, and all their amazing apparel over at Rungni. You can use the link in your show notes right there and code STRUGGLE to get that 15% off. All right, let's keep the train moving here. Let's talk about nutrition. Obviously, nutrition has been a struggle for you in the past. You've been very open about your struggles, your eating disorder when you were younger, and the pressures, especially on a youth athlete. We don't necessarily have to rehash that entire thing right now, but we can dip into part of it if you'd like, as it's definitely part of your story and really juxtaposes where you're at currently. But yeah, let's just open it up and what would you like to share here about your struggles with nutrition, and we can talk about what you're doing now.
It's been very interesting watching the sport progress, because when I started climbing at 6 years old, climbing was still that small niche in the corner sport that people didn't really take seriously. Climbing gyms didn't exist in metropolitan areas. It'd be like in the corner somewhere of somebody's renovated garage, and like they were always just conduits to outdoor climbing, because like who would want to climb in a gym? Like you want to climb the rocks.
Right.
And so I feel like growing up in that era of climbing, there wasn't a lot of sports science incorporated into the sport, especially into the high performance aspect of it. And so people were kind of just guessing and going with the flow and going based upon what people before them had already done. And climbing is a strength to weight ratio sport, like a lot of others, like gymnastics and such. And so a lot of people, it's like, well, either you gain the strength or you lose the weight or do some combination of both to perform. And so I feel like with that in mind, nutrition has always been like a very touchy and taboo discussion to have in climbing, because a lot of times you can tell when athletes are perhaps not the healthiest or aren't doing things that are conducive to like long-term health performance. And you also knew that like they probably weren't incorporating doctors or like teams of people who are watching their metrics and making sure. I feel like that's a lot different now for a lot of teams and people, because there's a lot more money in the sport, but back then that just wasn't the case. And so I feel like for me, it's been a journey balancing out my nutrition. But to be honest, I've never really been hugely focused on like specific nutrition metrics. Like I'm not obsessing over how much protein I'm intaking or how much carbs or anything. Like usually I try to just, like a lot of other things, just kind of go based on how I feel. Like I like balanced meals that feel like I'm getting everything. And typically if I'm like not eating enough sugar or carbs or meat or something, like usually my body tells me that I need that thing, and I usually will just eat it because it's not as important to me. And I feel like now, especially like I'm older and, I process food differently, my body processes things differently. I'm just like a lot less regimented on what I put in my body than I used to be.
That's really interesting to hear. And I appreciate you sharing that kind of long length perspective there. I would like to maybe pick up on what you were saying towards the end there, which is just your relationship now with the way you fuel, which seems more kind of intuitive with how you're feeling rather than regimented, as you were just saying. And with this kind of battle that you had in the past with disordered eating, is that something that is always in the past, or is that something that's still present for you? Is it still something that you are acutely aware of or struggle with, or is it now kind of Kai 2.0 that and you've moved past it?
Well, I've always felt this was a pretty nuanced question or condition because, I mean, when you're performing at the highest level of any sport, there's going to be tighter margins in terms of health, performance, weight, all those things, because it's just you're trying to be the 1% of 1%, and that applies to almost everything that you do in life. And so I've always been cognizant of being healthy, but I feel like a lot of times it could be really easy to lose perspective when the cultural norms are telling you one thing, especially as a kid. Like, I feel like as a kid, I just was like doing what everybody else was doing and like doing what my role models were doing. Cause I mean, I made my first finals in a pro competition when I was 13, and I was around my idols at a really young age. And so I was watching and mimicking and doing what I thought was just the status quo because it was. But I feel like as I've gotten older, I feel like, yeah, like I'm a lot more careful with it, but I'm also, aware of the fact that my weight and my nutrition is going to fluctuate based upon what I'm doing and what I'm projecting. That's just being human, like when you are preparing yourself for doing something very difficult, you're going to tailor your training and your approach to what that objective is. And so I think it's very common and normal to like maybe be a bit lighter when you're performing than you were before. But there's a difference between being a bit lighter and more optimal for performance versus doing things that are like actively damaging your body. And I feel like at some point, hopefully as a sport, we can have a lot healthier conversations around that instead of living in like direct binaries of like, losing weight is bad and, performing at all weights is fine. It's like you have to do based upon what your body can accept and take. And some people's bodies operate at different heights, weights, levels. And you just got to adjust to it. Like, I'm not really sure if I answered your question, but I feel like that's really like how I would address that, because I want people to know that like I truly believe that you can perform at your best at whatever natural like weight or just equilibrium that you exist at, but it has to be to you. You can't be looking to other people for that guidance, really.
This, maybe more than anything else that we talk about on this show and the format that I have, is the most individualized nutrition and what we need and what our bodies respond to. And I agree, it's been an interesting evolution for the conversation in the sport. In the best way, the pendulum has shifted towards a movement of just being healthy at whatever weight you are and embracing that, to the point where maybe, at least in some of the conversations I've had, it's maybe gone too far and it can start to swing back, and we can talk about performance weight cuts. Like you just mentioned, there could be seasons of a year for those who are trying to perform at the cutting edge. I'm a weekend warrior. I'm a dad. Like, I'm probably not playing the same game of fractions that you are, but there can be times to kind of manipulate those dials, if you will, up or down. And you mentioned climbing as a strength to weight ratio sport. You mentioned gymnastics there as well. There are two sides to this equation. And for a long time, climbers only focused on weight. And now it seems like there's a lot of focus on strength and maybe not as much focus on weight. And that's probably a healthy shift for the most part for our sport here. But for climbers who are maybe thinking about this for the first time, who have just been climbing recreationally for a while and are now like, oh, I think performance is something I want to get psyched on. I really want to push myself to be the best I can be. How do you look at that ratio, those two components, strength and weight?
The way I look at them is interesting because climbing is a movement sport. You are literally manipulating your center of gravity to move up the wall. And so when you're doing that, there's obviously a lot of science and like physiology involved in that process. And so, you focus on the strength, but then you also have to balance that with the muscle mass, and also balance that with like, how is your equilibrium changing as those changes are coming to you? And so like, I mean, for example, when you look at slab climbing, right? A lot of times women are a lot better at it because in order to be good at that type of climbing, it's advantageous to have a lower center of gravity and to be smaller and lighter. And women typically check all those boxes. And so like you look at World Cup training and the World Cup women will smack the men down on the slabs. Easy. But then on the flip side of that, the women will struggle on the power boulders that the men don't. And it's just because, I mean, the muscular structure, the higher center of gravity, it's like easier to generate movement and do coordination movements when your center of gravity is higher and you're stronger in the upper body. And so it's more so like, it's like balancing out all those nuances. So strength to weight is one aspect, but it's just not nuanced enough to explain, all the little aspects that are necessary to perform at a high level in a sport like this. And that's the reason why it's so important to have experienced coaches and teams of people that are like looking at you and like analyzing those things to tell you like, typically you're not performing at your best because you're not strong enough or, you're not light enough. Usually it's because there's a fundamental skill set or like movement pattern that you just don't know or not excellent at. You need to train that instead of worrying about, this arbitrary ratio that typically people don't even know. There's no numbers to it. They're just guessing, right? And so I just feel like if I could say anything to that, it's like, I just wouldn't stress too much about it, because if you feel like you're improving and you're tackling specific weaknesses, usually I'll tailor my training based upon, okay, I have this specific thing that I struggle with. And like, I don't know why, but I'll like perform in front of my coaches or have people come in and look at it and tell me what I need to improve on. And if you're continuously improving in that aspect, I feel like the other pieces of the puzzle kind of just fall together.
What a wise perspective to have. And obviously you have it because you've lived it. Correct me if I'm wrong. You climbed your first 9A Aravea at 15 years old. Was that right? So then not quite a decade later, not only did you climb Life of Villains 9A, but then Death of Villains 9A plus 515A, and then had this insane week where you climbed 3 9As in like a few days. And so do you have a sense for like what you weighed when you were 15 versus what you weighed when you just went on this like sending spree?
It's funny you ask that. I've been looking back at some old footage and stuff. And back in the day, when we used to do competitions, they used to put like our heights, our weights, our stats and everything. They don't do that as much anymore because, I mean, that's a bit private. But I think when I won my first nationals at 15, I think I weighed about like 130 pounds-ish. And like now I weigh like 190 pounds. It's like, that's like 60-pound difference. I'm like a lot taller, like I'll built a lot differently. And so it feels weird sometimes, even because people ask me the question like, do you feel like you're the strongest you've ever been? And I'm like, well, that's a really hard question to answer because I haven't performed at a high level in the same body. So I can't compare who I was when I climbed Aravea to who I was when I climbed Life of Villains or anything else. I'm just like a new person. I feel like I'm definitely like the strongest I've been in this period of time. But yeah, I just got to keep moving forward.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the rate at which you're ticking the hardest climbs you've ever done strongly suggests that you're not anywhere near your peak. And that's really exciting for, I'm sure for you, but certainly for all of us, for me as well, who are watching you perform now in this new body as new Kai. And just from, kind of a armchair expert point of view here, I think that adding 60 pounds and some height not only didn't hinder your performance, but obviously has led to incredible jumps and leaps in your performance now that you're climbing the hardest stuff that you've ever done. So I think, if we're to put kind of a little bit of a cap on this nutrition chapter, it's that at least for you, because it's highly individualized, but at least for you, running at that higher weight, healthier weight, stronger weight, putting on more strength, whatever it is that kind of has happened to you over these last handful of years seems to be paying off in ways on that strength to weight ratio scale, if you will, on ways that are really beneficial to your performance.
I agree with that. And I also want to say that like the journey between all those growth spurts and like adjusting my climbing style and like it took a lot of work because I literally had to change the climber I was and the techniques I used in the way I trained fundamentally from the ground up in order to take advantage of the things that I have now. Because, I mean, so much changed in my climbing that there were definitely years in the middle where I like had very high doubts about whether I'd be able to perform at a high level and continue doing so. But luckily, the people around me were so patient and helping me learn new techniques to move around certain moves and learn how to take advantage of the advantages that I have in my build, and also being able to close in on the weaknesses that started to develop because of the size that I was. And so it's been a journey. I wouldn't say it's just as simple as, like he got taller and bigger and now he's better. It's more so like, like we worked incrementally along the way to be able to like close those gaps of the weaknesses and be able to capitalize on the strengths so that I could be the athlete that I am today.
Well, you're such a professional because you've just given me the perfect segue to now talk about our next chapter, which is technique and tactics. And yeah, what a cool perspective to have. Like you got a whole new car and you had to learn how to drive it. And it's not like just one day you woke up and you're like, let's go. There was a learning curve there. And you mentioned there were certain techniques that you needed to focus on or that really helped you as you were moving into this longer, taller, stronger body. And I'm curious what that is or what stands out in terms of those techniques that were a challenge at first, but now I'm assuming have maybe become a bit of an asset for you.
Yeah. I mean, as you get bigger, the box that you climb in becomes also a lot bigger. It becomes a lot more difficult to like fit into smaller boxes that were like set or intended for smaller athletes. And so I started to notice as I got big growth spurts and was still in the same season of competition that like moves that felt like not even a second thought. Suddenly I feel crammed and uncomfortable and I'm like not getting the right feet or positionings to generate the movement that was intended. And so like that was really frustrating for me. So I had to really hone in on perfecting my flexibility and mobility program and being able to like contort myself into weird positions, but not only to do that, but also be able to generate from those positions so that I can be comfortable in the next position. And that was not easy. I mean, sure. I am a bit more tolerant to stretching now, but it was not always a thing I liked to do. And I can remember times when like my mom would be stretching me on the floor and I would just be like, I want to go to bed or I want to go home. Like, I don't want to be here. And my mom always had this mantra every time I would complain in the gym that was like, I'll step back when you lower your goals. And I refuse because I can't ever accept failure. So she kept going, I kept going, and slowly things just started to fall together. Yeah, I got more flexible, I got more mobile. I started working on like generating more power and just perfecting all those little things that started to become weaknesses, turning them into strengths. Because now, no one expects the 6'3" lanky kid to be able to scrunch up in a box for a 5'3" climber and then explode out of it. But, I was able to use that to my advantage.
Hell yeah. How cool. And just that fighter spirit. I mean, this is why, you're an elite climber and I'm a weekend warrior, is that you don't give up when the going gets tough. And I'm curious if there's a technique that stands out that, really has helped you unlock certain things. Look, what comes to mind when I see some of your climbing are like these absolutely disgusting drop knees. I'm like, how is his leg still attached to his body right now? I don't know if that's one of them or not, but I'd love to hear like what you feel has kind of helped to unlock, some of this higher performance for you now in that specific kind of technique area.
Well, technique is a broad one because it's a combination of having the skills and knowing when to apply them. And I think is just because of my experience as a climber. I mean, I've been climbing for 18 going on, about 18 years, I think. And all that competing, all that climbing, all that performing has like helped me identify movements and being able to figure out like what's the best for me. Like I was just in Spain trying this route called Ciudad de Dios, and the crux of the climb is doing these really heinous, like small underclean crimps and like having to like generate. You can't do it dynamically. It's so powerful and strong, but you have to do it statically, which is why usually it's a climb that boulders really excel at if they want to do high level lead climbing. And that movement just is not me. And I remember like struggling on these moves. And then finally I was like, I have to find a more efficient way to do this. And so instead I had this crimp and I had the hold you go off of it, which wasn't that far away. And I was like, I'll just put my foot on it and drop knee it. And as soon as I did that, I was able to create the same level of tension that I needed to do it statically than the way that everybody else was doing it. And it made everything click and come together easier. And I feel like, yeah, like being able to recognize that on the spot and see those sequences is something that you can't replace experience with. Like you have to climb enough to have the Rolodex of experiences to be able to know when to apply certain moves in the situation that's given.
Absolutely. Here. And again, I think a theme that's been interesting that I've seen in hosting this show for a few years now is swing from focusing very much on just scientific styles of training off the wall to improve individual muscles or energy systems to now a bit of a pendulum swinging back towards focusing a lot on movement and on the wall types of training to further hone the movement so that we can apply the strength or the fitness that we have in better ways. And you do that incredibly well. It looks very fluid, very easy. It's very interesting to hear you say that mobility and flexibility were a bit of a challenge for you. I remember talking to Alex Magos where he said that he wasn't always very flexible. And it's just like so crazy to hear because when I see you climb or I see Alex Magos climb, I'm just like, oh, this comes naturally all the time. But it's something that you've actually worked at, it sounds like.
Well, I think that Magos could probably second this same statement where I say that it's not that I have always been flexible. Like I've always had a certain level of flexibility, but I never needed it to the extremes that I use it now because it just simply wasn't necessary. Like I was a pretty average sized climber for most of like being a kid or be a young teenager. And so like doing those crazy drop knees or splits or things, like I didn't have to because the climbs were set for my size. And so I was always going to be comfortable until I wasn't. And so I feel like it's more so an adaptation of like, typically you have to be put in a position where you are forced to adapt and be willing to make the changes to progress to the next level. And so for me, it was like, okay, either I adapt or I move on. And to me, I just felt like I wanted to be able to achieve those boulders and, keep having the success that I was having, whether it was in competitions or outdoors. So I was just willing to put in the work.
Sick. So good, dude. Very, very motivating and really cool to kind of get that window into part of your process. I want to talk about one more thing here in this tactics chapter, and that's around this experience that you had when you were projecting Death of Villains, which was a first ascent, 9A plus, 515A. And, you share the process quite well, I thought, on Instagram. And one of the things that you wrote really stood out to me. And you said that, I think this was as you were getting closer to sending it, but you said, sometimes you have to go backwards to move forwards, to break big goals down into smaller ones. And for those of us that are projecting at any level, I'm trying to climb my first 13A right now. And it's been, I'm coming up on a year here where I got very close at the end of last season, but didn't quite do it. And progress has seemed like it's been slowing or maybe even halting, or as you wrote there, maybe even going backwards. And I'm still in it. I haven't sent yet. So I'd love to hear what you meant as you wrote that and as it pertained to your experience projecting the hardest thing you've ever climbed.
Well, I think when I wrote that, it was during a time where I felt like when I was climbing Death of the Villains, it's such a long power endurance route and it's very specific in that style. Like every move, they, on average, I would say the moves are difficult, but I feel like when you build up to that level, I feel like, the hardest move you were going to encounter was maybe V9, V10, sections of routes, which is still hard, but maybe not the limit of my abilities. And so when I'm pushing through those sections, it was like, okay, if any of these sections were on the ground, I'd be perfectly fine. But the fact that they're being stacked on top of each other and I'm climbing I think it took me 15 plus minutes to do this route on my set and go.
Crazy.
It's like you have to have a level of just fitness that is so extreme. And when you get closer and closer to your body's physical limit, the margin of error becomes smaller and smaller. So every little thing just starts to matter. If the weather's off, if you didn't get enough recovery or you didn't eat or drink enough, all of the little things start to show up in your performance because you almost have to be perfect in order to get it done. And so I definitely had days on that climb where, I didn't even have that many days because it rained a lot. But it was like definitely days in that experience where I'm like, oh, I got like 2 clips further the day before and now I can't move forward. Like, what am I doing wrong? And it was so frustrating, but it was one of those things where it's like, as long as I'm showing up to the job and doing my best, there is something salvageable here. I'm still learning, I'm still pushing, and I'm still perfecting the moves that I can do so that the next day I show up, I can translate that knowledge to perhaps a better fitter body. And I feel like that was really something I noticed on Death of Villains, because I had a day where I performed and it was like kind of bad. And I like went home and I was really annoyed, but I started like visualizing and preparing for the next day. And I took an extra rest day actually. And I came back the next day and I went from like struggling to winning it maybe like a bit halfway to like almost doing it the next training session. And it was because I had been so persistent with the movement that when my body was fitter, I still knew what to do. And I wasn't starting from scratch. So I guess the take-home message of that post was keep showing up to the job and eventually all the pieces will come together.
That's such helpful advice for me as well, because not every day are you going to show up ready to send. But to your point, you can work sections or single moves, whatever it is, so that when you do show up, to your point, with that fitter body, that body that's ready to go, you've got a little bit more dialed. And I'm curious on Death of Villains and Life of Villains as well, whichever maybe you'd like to look at. Was it tactically, was it a ground up strategy, or were you working certain links, or did you do a low point strategy? How did you break that one up? Such a long route.
Well, I think I had more of this experience with Life of Villains because I was a lot fitter for Death of Villains, and also half of Death of Villains is Life of Villains. So like I had a lot of it figured out already. But when I was trying Life of Villains, it was very much making sure I could do all the moves and do the important sections continuously before I started linking them together. Because you just have to break it down into what's difficult for you and what's not. And every time you approach a project, there's going to be sections of the route or certain movements that are going to be harder for you than others. And so for me, I remember like, okay, if I climbing the first maybe 13A section of the route isn't difficult for me, I don't have to, my brain doesn't have to be on to do that part. I can just do it and then go up to the jugs. But the second part of it is something that's really difficult. So like on those days, I need to just start working that section, making sure I can continuously make it through there. And then usually I get really tired by the time I get to this hold. So being able to stop there, then connecting that to the anchors. And so typically you start bringing it down. I'm like, okay, I 3 hung it, then I 2 hung it, then I 1 hung it. And then you start going for sins. It's like slowly breaking down the route until it starts to submit.
I love it. So good, dude. Now, I just want to give a little shout out here to PhysiVantage, the official climbing nutrition sponsor of The Struggle. I have been a paying customer of PhysiVantage for a couple of years now, and this stuff is truly the best of the best if you all want to level up your training and your performance, and I know you do. I'll give you a little window into my routine here. There are a few PhysiVantage products that I take every day, whether I climb or not. First, I start my day with their superfood greens, which taste delicious and is just the best way for me to get going in the morning. It supports my immune system and my digestive health. I just always feel like I'm good as long as I start my day with their greens. I also take their magnesium supplement every day, Mag ATP, which, as it turns out, and I didn't know this, a lot of people are deficient in, and among other things, it helps me to improve my sleep, which of course is really important for recovery. Lastly, I take their supercharged collagen every day as well to support my tendons and ligaments so that I can train harder and recover faster. It is all science-backed stuff. It tastes delicious, which I think is also very important. And I can also say with absolute sincerity that I'm training harder right now than I ever have before, and I have never felt better. And I attribute that a lot to PhysiVantage and how it's helping me to recover and perform my best. So if you're looking for that extra edge, hit the link in your podcast app or use checkout code STRUGGLE15 to save 15% off any full-price nutrition order at PhysiVantage.com. I really think you're going to feel the difference. Check it out. This episode is supported by Boulder Bear's caffeinated gummies. And oh my gosh, I've already got a smile on my face just saying this. They taste like candy and they kick like coffee. I love them so much. I'm personally pretty sensitive to caffeine. Like if I have too much, it makes me jittery, which is not what I want when I'm on a route. So what I love is that each Boulder Bear contains 20 milligrams of caffeine plus 22 milligrams of collagen. So I can perfectly dial in the boost of energy and focus that I want and take care of my tendons while I'm at it. I usually have like 3 or 4 gummies about 20 minutes before pulling on, and just like that, boom, I'm ready to send the proj. I also love that they're tiny and they're light, so they do not weigh down my pack on the hike in or in my stomach. Like you don't have like any liquid sloshing around your stomach like if you crush a Red Bull or some coffee. I just love these guys so much. They're a small company. I know the founder. He's a really good dude, and you can score a free refillable travel pouch plus 15% off when you order a bundle using code STRUGGLE over at boulderbears.com. That link is right there in your podcast player. Boulder Bears, all flash, no crash. A great opportunity for us to shift now and look at the mental game side of climbing and mindset. I've got so much to talk about here, but I'll enter into this chapter where we always do, which is with struggle. And does something stand out in the mental game that's a struggle for you or has been a struggle for you?
I feel like perhaps the biggest struggle when it comes to mental game is managing expectations, because it could be so easy to just believe that this mythical grade or thing that you've had for so long is just impossible, and that it's going to take so much effort and work, and it's going to be at the absolute limit of your abilities. And then you show up, and then you realize it's not. It's very attainable. It's right there. And the biggest barrier is just believing that you can do it. And I feel like I've had that experience a lot this year, where I just believed as a kid, when I started climbing, 515A was the hardest grade in the world. And it was one of those things where it was like, oh, like this is just that mythical grade that I never even set as a goal because I didn't think of it as like within the stratosphere of ability. And so when I started even setting that goal and showing up to Death of Villains in the spring, it was one of those things where it's like, okay, like I have to train so hard and like make sure that I'm so fit because I'm going to be encountering this thing that's going to be so much above me. And then I showed up and I realized, oh, like I'm already like one hanging it by like session 2 or 3. And I'm like, this is really close. It's like almost like the nerves started to build up because I'm like, this goal is significantly closer than I thought it was. And like, I wasn't prepared to be in that fight sin mode. But I feel like for me, once I was able to cross that hurdle and just keep fighting and not even think about the goals or the implications of if I sent it and what it would mean for me, I was just able to completely immerse myself in the process. And once I sent it, it felt like my body was just like, okay, that's over. We can do anything at that level. It's like, I can't say I was fitter after Death of Villains than to now. I just think that mentally, once I started believing that level was possible for me, then the climbs at that level started to feel a lot easier.
How cool is that? I'd love to explore that just a little bit more, as this is something that I've been experiencing myself. And again, I think is quite relatable to those of us who are just trying hard at whatever level that is on boulders or sport routes. And when you achieved that shift, was the goal itself something that you managed to kind of put out of your mind? I'm speaking from my own experience here. Like I still feel like I've given a lot of importance to this 13A, which is like, 7C plus or whatever. Like it's not even, it means something in one grade and it doesn't really mean something in another way of grading it. But like it seems very big to me. Like it's a new number. And so I've created this thing around it. And maybe you created something around 15A, but it sounds like you also got to a point where you just felt that it was achievable and it maybe took some of the power away. So yeah, I'm just maybe a little bit curious how that kind of mental shift came about. And if you start thinking about the next one, 9B or whatever it might be, how do you try to frame that for yourself so it doesn't put too much power, I guess, onto the achievement itself?
I think for me, being able to humanize goals is something that far transcends just climbing. I feel like there's always going to be a next level or a next objective that's going to feel like this could be it. This is the one. But sometimes when you zoom too far out, you start looking at the big picture, it just gets very overwhelming. You don't know which thing to approach first or how to rationalize being able to approach a goal that big. And so you just have to zoom in to what you can handle in the moment and take things step by step. I think for me, even trying Death of Villains, it's like, okay, well, I don't know about sitting this route, but I do know that I can do this section. And I do know that this specific move gives me problems and this is what I need to work on. And when you start to perfect those things and take those steps to progress forward, then typically the goals start to become closer and closer and closer until achieving the puzzle only takes one more piece. And that's a lot easier to put together than trying to figure out how you're going to put this huge puzzle together when you open the box. And so I think that is usually how I'll handle that. It's like looking at this big climb that seems so intimidating is a lot, but honing it in on, I got these 3 puzzle pieces in front of me that I know fit together and start moving from there. It makes the goals a lot more attainable and a lot more human.
Yeah, it's so important, I think, when we're taking on something that we've never done before is to make it achievable in that way. I really appreciate you sharing part of that process. You know, when you were working on Death of Villains, you posted a Brene Brown quote on Instagram. I wrote down here, vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. And why did you post that at that time? What were you experiencing and what did that mean to you?
I'm going to be so real. I don't even remember what post I put that under. I'm only about
No. That's great because you already moved on and climbed like a million other things. But essentially, this is when you were working on Death of Villains, and I'm assuming maybe it was, you know, giving you some challenges for a little bit. And I don't know exactly what post it was either, but I don't know. You know, just I guess it's this idea around vulnerability and maybe being okay with not every day being great or taking those steps back. It might have been in that similar post that I was talking about where it was like, you know, you can feel like you can go backwards. And so, you know, for some of us, and I can speak from my own experience here, if I'm really struggling on a project, like if I have a handful of bad days, whether it's at the gym on a moonboard thing I'm trying to work on or my big project out at the Red, like it can affect me. Like it can kind of beat me down a little bit. And when you're working on these things that are hard or at your limit, and you have a string of days that maybe aren't going the way that you wanted them to go, do you embrace that vulnerability or, you know, does it keep you down? How do you get through those tougher times?
Well, I feel like for me, people associate the word vulnerable with weakness. It's like putting yourself out there in a way where success isn't guaranteed and people are watching your flaws in your things that aren't perfect. And I feel like for me, it's like the ability to not care and to worry about your own like progression as opposed to, I guess, what everybody else is perceiving in the moment. People really have a hard time being perceived. And that could be a product of social media or whatever. I mean, I feel like that's a very human thing as well. But I feel like it's more like potent now than ever. But I just say that like, you know, being able to confidently name a goal and not be afraid to approach it and be vulnerable about it and to speak on the challenges and the progress is something that makes you stronger in the end. Because the minute you get the confidence to put yourself out there, it opens the door to what options are available and what goals are achievable. Because I feel like it's so easy to be like, that's just above me and that's not within my level. Let me stay in my comfort zone. But the only way you improve and make strides towards being better at anything is if you're willing to step outside that comfort zone and truly push yourself to the next level.
Hell yes. Let's go. Oh my God, I'm so hyped, Kai. Well, last question on this chapter is around what happens when you get there. And you did send Death of Villains in pretty short order, relatively speaking. And we all set, you know, a lot of people who are listening to this, maybe not all of us. So some people just go out and climb things that they can send in a day. But for those who project and really enjoy that process of taking on something that the outcome isn't certain, we can, or certainly I can, pin a level of what I think will be happiness and fulfillment to that. And you wrote about the arrival fallacy after sending, you know, was it Life of Villains or Death of Villains when you wrote that?
Actually, I wrote about the arrival fallacy when I finished my Spain trip because growing up, even when I was a kid, it's like 9A was a grade that I really had to push for. And so to like send 3 of them in a week and have this, I mean, I think I did 5 in like the span. Well, I did 4 in the month and then like 5 in like, a few months.
Crazy.
And so it was like so many in a row where I was like, okay, like this is a comfortable level for me. Whereas, a few years ago, this was like the limit of my performance. And so it was one of those things where it's like, okay, well, what now? And also it's like, am I pushing myself far enough? And is this a goal worth setting anymore? Like, am I not working hard enough? Are these climbs just too easy? Like, why is it all coming so soon? It's one of those things where it's so easy to invalidate an achievement when you feel like you didn't work hard enough to earn it. But I feel like I kind of had to put things in perspective, and it's like, do you remember where you were a year ago? Like, do you remember how much work you put into the gym and how much work you had to put in with your therapist and how much work you had to put in with Shane in order to like train everything up to be at this level? Like, this did not come easy. It's just you're at the finish line in hindsight of 2020. And you get to look at all the things, but because they're not happening in your day to day, they seem trivial. Like you skip all the little suffering details and go straight to the glory. And so you have to really just like appreciate all the work that you put in to get to that point, and also take in the work that isn't so tangible. Like it's easy to open a training journal and look at the amount of training that you put in, but it's not as easy to think about all the days where you doubted your abilities and all the days that, didn't believe that any of these things could be possible or had to work on your mental or emotional or, physiological state in order to get to that point. So it's just like being kinder to yourself and appreciating the work you're doing and having that carry over to motivation and move forward.
Well, this gives us a good opportunity to move into our final chapter here, which is things that bring you a lot of fulfillment outside of climbing. And while the arrival fallacy may be something that exists for us as we achieve certain new goals, it seems like you're quite driven and gain a lot of fulfillment from things that you're doing off the wall as well, some climbing related and others beyond. I want to talk about Climbing for Change first and foremost. This is a nonprofit that you started and that you are the CEO of, if I'm not mistaken. And it's just doing some amazing work out there. And it's also been in the news recently because of this College Park kind of fight against some, I don't know if shady is the right word, maybe corruption is, I'm not quite sure how you would define it, but man, I was following along and signing petitions and sharing stuff, and like it got me all fired up. So tell me a little bit about Climbing for Change, where it's at right now, what it means to you, and we can talk a little bit about the College Park thing as well, if that's still relevant and in the news.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I just grew up with the principle that to whom much is given, much is required, because my mother was always very adamant about no matter what you have more than someone else. And so it's your responsibility to be a part of the community and give back where you can and just be a part of like something bigger than yourself. And I mean, that journey for me started when I was 3, and I used to, volunteer, whatever you want to call that, at my mom's and my grandmother's food and clothing drive back in Cleveland when I was a kid. I used to give toys to other kids and clothes and jackets to other kids. And I used to like donate my Christmas money to like different charities and stuff. And I was always just doing community work growing up. And so when it came for me to take a break from competitions and high performance and like going into college and enjoying that experience, I never felt like I wanted to detach myself from the community, because climbing was a space that almost raised me hand in hand with my mom. Like a lot of the principles and community and the things that I learned as a kid came from people that I met in the climbing community. I wanted to give back and also create the spaces that I wish existed when I was a kid. And so Climbing for Change for me is just my way of paying it forward and being able to like facilitate more safe spaces for people of color, disenfranchised communities to like integrate into this community that has done so much good for myself and for so many other people in the world. I feel like, the fact that we've been able to use climbing as a means of therapy and, trauma treatment and like different things that we've been able to fund with just shows like how healing and lifelong this sport can be as opposed to a lot of others. It's a huge privilege to be able to be in a sport where as athletes and as participants, there isn't a defined expiration date, and that we can appreciate this in different forms for our entire lives, the community and the sport. And so if I can provide that healing space for communities who really need it the most, I feel like for me, that's the biggest thing I could ever give back to my sport.
Man, that's so beautiful. I love the provenance of it. It's been instilled in you since you were just a few years old, and how you're now taking that and in very significant ways, actually paying that forward to the community. I'm curious what kind of practically that looks like. Like, how are you creating this space for disenfranchised or people of color? Yeah, like what? Like, do you have gyms? Are you partnering with other organizations?
Yeah.
Like, what does it look like?
Well, Climate for Change acts more so as a middle person in the industry to help magnify the work that's being done on the ground. Because I feel like for me, the position I never wanted to be in as the CEO of Climate for Change, but also as like probably one of the most high profile Black people and people of color in this industry, is to step in a community and bulldoze over existing organizations or infrastructures of work that was already going on. Because I feel like the nonprofit space can feel competitive at times, where it should be collaborative. We should be not worrying about fighting for a small slice of the pie, but wondering, why is the slice so small? And so for me, I wanted to like be able to give resources and also be a middle person to like amplify just the voices and the work that was going on. And so in nature, Climate for Change, we offer grant opportunities, we create physical programs, but really what we do is just try to connect people together to create like these sustainable ecosystems where people can learn and grow and diversify the sport in a way that's sustainable and doesn't need a constant hand pulling the strings, making sure that it's working. Because I feel like for me, it's very difficult to step into someone's community and tell them what they need. It's much easier to have people who live there, who experience the hardships, to be able to craft solutions that address them more poignantly and just more holistically. And so being able to help people in that way is a lot more impactful long-term, because I feel like the systems that exist that make the outdoors so inaccessible for people of color and for people from disadvantaged communities, it took generations, centuries to build. And even if the act is like pointed from every direction, it's going to take just as long to dismantle. And I probably won't be alive to see that day. But I feel like if I can help get things moving that can operate without my involvement, I feel like that's how you make change that develops over time into something a lot bigger.
Well, when you think about the work that you're doing then, and these communities or organizations or grant recipients that you've come up to support or worked with, what stands out? I'd just love to hear, maybe there's a story that you have that's meaningful, or some work that's being done that you're particularly proud of specifically.
Well, I really feel like this College Park story, even in infancy, was something that I was so proud of, because we started Climate for Change around July or August of 2020, and the world was shut down. We were in the middle of the Black Lives Matter movement, and so tensions were extremely high. And I had been unofficially working with so many people simultaneously behind the scenes to help craft DEI statements and programs and impactful solutions to the problems that existed in the outdoors. And so creating Climate for Change initially was just to create a structure that was sustainable to like help people. And so when I created it, and immediately I started working with the city of Atlanta and the city of College Park and getting the ball rolling, I mean, we were able to have a grand opening in January, which anyone who's ever done work in the city or with bureaucracy knows that trying to put a program together in 6 months is difficult.
Yeah.
Very hard. But the fact that everybody seemed so open to the idea and the concept, I was very much prepared to like with spreadsheets and PowerPoints and explaining like how important this is. But as soon as I was able to explain the concept, people just seemed to get it, you know? And that felt so validating, knowing that like people understand the importance of this work and they're willing to support it and stand behind it. And so that project felt so uplifting, and it made it all the more confusing when 4 years later, it was in threat of being taken down for no reason because I had worked so closely with the city to make sure that everything worked so well. And I used it as a prototype to hopefully replicate that same model in other cities, that for it to be snatched away with how much time and money and partners we had invested in it, it just seemed like a waste and a disappointing one with no reason behind it.
Yeah, I mean, the way it unfolded was like a political thriller. And I'm sure most people listening here were following it because not only was it all over your Instagram, but it was all over a lot of other high profile climbers' Instagrams that were trying to shine a spotlight on it. And it sounds like it was resolved in a way that is now keeping the climbing wall there and fully accessible to the community. Is that what happened? I mean, did you prove victorious in your fight against City Hall?
Well, the end result was that the council reconsidered and they decided to not only keep the wall, but the $60,000 they had set aside to investigate the wall to make sure that it was safe and operable, they decided to give back to the program so that we could use it for the kids and hopefully keeping it active and involved with the community. And so we ended up ending the project in that whole debacle a lot better off than we started. But it was a very stressful and contentious month and a half where we really didn't know what was going on or how to move forward.
Yeah, well, congratulations to you and the team that fought so hard to reverse a decision that seemed like it was going to be irreversible. And it sounds like now, even to the benefit of those kiddos there, they're going to take advantage of that $60,000 in the programming. I'd love to talk for a second about inclusivity and racism and access in our sport in general without hopefully, going down too far of a rabbit hole, or maybe if we do, whatever.
I don't know what to say. These are the large topics.
Let's keep it to 3 minutes, Kai, and try not to offend anybody. No, I'm just kidding. But as I've got an adopted daughter with brown skin. She's 6 years old. She's an absolute crusher. I take her to the crag with me. We go to the gym. But, I'm becoming more aware now as she gets older that she's oftentimes the only brown person in the gym on any given day. Not always, but, often, or at the crag. And, she has the benefit of being with me and, know my way around and all of this. But I have a very small kind of look into this world through a lens that I hadn't before, just being like a white guy of privilege for my entire life. But now I'm kind of experiencing a little bit through my daughter's eyes. And you've written about, not having mentors or climbers that looked like you. And you are now, I'm sure, a role model to people of all color, of course, but to people with brown skin, my daughter included. And just from your perspective here, if you could speak to where you see the sport at right now in that area and maybe where it's going or where it still has some opportunity for improvement, I think it could be helpful for everybody who's listening to understand that through your lens and maybe help us all to be a little bit more aware and maybe take some action if we could.
Oof. Okay. Well,
it's a lot. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. To answer your question as concisely as I possibly can, I feel like currently where climbing is, we're probably in the most pivotal point in the sport that it will probably ever be in its history. Because when I started climbing 18 years ago, the sport was significantly smaller, significantly more niche. If you wanted to be involved in the community at a large scale, you had to prove your worth and align yourself with the community values. And so they had to, whether it was performance and giving back and being integrated into the climbing, it was very much like a rite of passage to be really within the space. But it was really one space. And now, as the sport's grown, you have major gym chains, multi-million-dollar gym chains in almost every metropolitan city in the country. The sport is blowing up. It's in the Olympics. Social media, icons that are in the sport that are top-level climbers are top-level celebrities in general society, which is an insane thing to think about. And so because of that, and it's because the sport is growing so much, it's one of those pivotal points where change that happens now could have a lot larger impact for the future. And everything's so malleable. And so I feel like this is a space where if you want to, create that progress of creating more inclusive spaces for people to enter the sport, it's more important in the present than it probably will ever be 10, 20 years from now. And so I feel like for me, that's why I push this work so much even now, because like I just see that like as the gyms are growing, like, and if we're able to implement programs in the gyms, like in the programs that are going on right now, like it could just grow into something so much bigger.
Just to kind of clarify a little bit about, because is it just access?
Yeah, no, I would say access. Well, also just creating like accessible entry points into climbing, because I feel like climbing is one of the few outdoor sports where, yes, it's expensive, but there is like tentacles in places where like you can actually reach the inner cities. I mean, when you look at sports like skiing, right, you can't move mountains, and it's an extremely expensive sport that's inaccessible, and there's not really much you can do about that infrastructure, right? But with climbing, it's like we have the opportunity to bring that experience to them in their communities around the block from where they live, and make it like, you know, an accessible point of entry. And so that's where, you know, partnering with the climbing gyms and making those programs, like building them up to something that's like welcoming and attainable is so important, because it's like either you grab them initially, because first impressions are everything. So either you can grab them initially, or it will continue the cycle of, oh, that's just not for us. And then you lose that opportunity of bringing in a whole new sector and market of people that have never been a part of the community and just never thought it was for them.
That outreach element seems so critical. It's not just about having a climbing wall where people can get to it using public transportation or whatever, but it's also outreach, creating a welcoming, friendly, exciting environment for people who maybe don't know what climbing is or have associated climbing with being a white person's sport or something like that. That seems so critical, that part of the element to it.
I feel like a lot of times people and businesses kind of look at DEI work in a very short term lens and think of it as like charity work and outreach work and helping people. But the way I see it is more so as a long-term business model, because when you look at the numbers, even from the Outdoor Industry Report, of people coming into the sport, the sector of people of color coming into climbing in the outdoors gets bigger and bigger and bigger, because they're becoming more and more involved and attainable. And so as those people come in, if you don't take advantage of that new market and bring them in and make them feel welcome, then you're going to lose it. Or they're going to create spaces of their own and you've lost that capital. And so I try to explain that to people all the time. And, you know, sometimes people listen, sometimes they don't. But I feel like we've learned time and time again in multiple other business sectors that you can be a leader of an industry for as long as you want, but if you don't adapt to the times, you will be left behind. And more people of color come into the sport every day through these climbing gyms, through these accessible city access points. And if you don't cater to them, then they'll look somewhere else.
Hell yeah. Hit them in the bank account. I love that, man. That's you've got such a great perspective on all this. I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing. Thank you for doing it. Yeah, I wish you all the luck with that. What does this year look like? What are your goals? And you don't have to share specifics, because I know that can be for climbers. You know, we don't typically want to talk about specific routes and that kind of thing. But I'd love to understand, as we look at kind of the year ahead, what are your goals on the wall and what are your goals for Climbing for Change?
I feel like for on the wall, I mean, I'll never be satisfied with just sitting still. I feel like I'm always going to be pushing myself to the next level. And so even planning for the fall, like some of the routes and things that I've been looking at are things that I think will definitely push me physically and mentally. And I'm just so excited for it. Like I've already been in the gym, like putting together my long-term training programs and talking to Shane about my goals and like mapping everything out so that by the time September, October comes around, like I'm prepared. But yeah, I'm so excited about like looking forward to the future. I have some big thing planned for the fall. So
hell yeah,
we'll see.
Let's go.
Yeah. In terms of Climbing for Change, I feel like, well, in the immediate future, we're planning on doing a grand opening for the College Park wall, because one thing we learned in the process is that because we opened this wall in the pandemic and there were so many restrictions on who could attend the wall and the grand opening and even the media coverage, a lot of people didn't even know that this resource existed in their communities. And this controversy brought it to life for a lot of people who loved and appreciated the work that was happening. And so if we can really emphasize and capitalize on the fact that like climbing is synonymous with community and bring everybody together, like I really would love to be able to use that to also replicate in other places. And so, yeah, we're like planning and investing and doing that re-grand opening and like doing some programming for College Park, along with the grants and the partnerships that we already have existing with so many other companies. But yeah, like I think our goal is to hopefully start putting roots in some other programs in other cities. And we're already looking to hopefully do that in the next few months or years. So we'll see.
So great. Linking in the show notes to Climbing for Change. Take your free dollars, find some extra dollars, and let's get some funds over to Climbing for Change. You guys are just doing such great work, man. Thank you for doing all that.
Thank you.
All right, that wraps things up with me and my new best friend here, Kai Lightner. Kai, newsflash, we are now best friends. I'm collecting you as a best friend. You are too insightful and too positive and too stoked for me to let you out of my grasp. I hope you all who are listening got so much out of this interview. Man, Kai's focus and determination, his belief in himself, it's all hard fought. He's really worked hard to become the person that he is on and off the rock. And I just found it endlessly inspiring, not only his climbing and his training, but also what he's doing with Climbing for Change and inclusivity in the sport. Man, what a friggin' guy. And gosh, there's so much more. If you want more Kai, and I know you do, we've got like 40 more minutes of a bonus conversation that we had after this interview here, where we dove into a ton of listener questions. Thank you for the thoughtful questions, everybody. We take a look at his early beginnings in the sport and who really impacted him and inspired him as a climber. We talk a lot about Jimmy Webb, Taylor McNeil, Sasha DeJulian, Adam Ondra, and so many more. Those people who now are his peers and that he climbs with. Kai answers the question about which one finger training protocol he would take with him to a desert island if he could. We really dive into like tall climber challenges or small box challenges. And so really, honestly, regardless of whatever height you are, we're going to be on climbs where we got to get scrunchy or we got to get long. And Kai is such a master of movement. He really breaks down how he looks at climbing in those different sizes. We dive into training and all sorts of training nerdery, including endurance-focused core exercises and maintaining tension, like that core tension that he has to when he's climbing basically inverted in the hurricane, like he did on Life and Death of Villains. We explore some time that he spent with Chris Sharma at the crag, as well as Adam Ondra, and those influences that he gets from climbing with those guys, and some really funny stories, actually, about where there are some similarities and some differences between the types of routes and also the styles of climbers that they are. He kind of compares and contrasts himself with Chris Sharma and Adam Ondra, and then also wraps in some other influences in his life. And then we wrap things up with a little bit of a roast of our friend Alex Honnold. You can get instant access to all of that right now at zero cost, actually, with a free trial over at patreon.com/thestruggleclimbing-show, or right there in your Apple Podcast player if you are an iPhone person. And you're also going to get instant access to more than 60 hours of other bonus content featuring the best of the best. Adam Ondra, Chris Sharma, Nina Williams, Alex Honnold, and so many more athletes and coaches that have been on the show here. Plus, pro clinics on stronger fingers with Dr. Tyler Nelson, advanced bouldering with Allison Vest, moonboard with Ravioli Biceps, performance hacks with Hazel Finley, and so many more. It's all there for just a few bucks a month, or actually zero cost right now with that free trial, so you can try it before you buy it. Although, honestly, your support as patrons and subscribers is really what helps to keep this thing going. So if you got a few bucks, I certainly would appreciate your help as I'm jamming away here in the podcast/utility closet. Thank you. I love you. Big thanks and appreciation to all of our show sponsors who have brought you this episode here at zero cost. Way to go. You can check your show notes for links and special discounts from those guys that are only available to Struggle listeners. And there's some great discounts there, so check them all out. Actually, you can see all of the show's brand sponsors and special deals by popping over to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/deals. Hey, did you know that The Struggle is carbon neutral in partnership with the Honnold Foundation? Well, you do now, and it feels pretty good for me to write that check every month. They're doing such amazing work to bring clean energy to communities around the world. Y'all can get inspired and learn more about their amazing work over at honnoldfoundation.org, and toss them some love if you can. They're doing awesome stuff. And lastly, The Struggle is a proud member of the Plugtone Audio Collective, a diverse group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. The show is produced and hosted by me, Ryan Devlin, and edited by the wonderful Glen Walker. All right, that clips the anchors on this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and supporting the show. If you want to do something that helps me out for zero cost, you could rate and review the show wherever you listen, or just share this with one of your climbing friends or the gym that you climb at. It really helps to get the word out there. I appreciate it. I hope your training and climbing are going great, and if you are struggling like me, well, just remember the struggle makes us stronger.